Hey everybody, Professor Snart here, just checking in as we get into Unit 4 for our poetry writing class, and this is our first workshop unit, so this is great. It's kind of the first opportunity to be writing your own work and then bringing it in and getting some feedback, kind of the best part, I think, of the poetry writing class. So, a couple of things then. First of all, like it says in the workshop unit, which I'm just clicking into, there is a couple of readings that you should look at. The first one is, well, the first one listed is the rules of poetry, but obviously you maybe have already looked at the what is a workshop material. I think most people are kind of familiar with and maybe have even done workshops before, so I think the basic idea is fairly straightforward. Even if it maybe has happened for you or you know of it in terms of more of the face-to-face model as opposed to online, really they're going to work pretty much the same way. You have your group. The groups are all listed here in the unit. Every group has a dedicated discussion board that you can get into, so it's really as simple as posting your poem for the group to look at and then getting feedback from everybody in the group, and then of course you provide feedback to each of the other people in your group. Pretty straightforward. The what is a workshop reading kind of lays out some useful tips for being a generous reader, and also of course providing useful feedback. So while it might feel good to just get, hey, I loved your poem, it's not very helpful kind of at the level that we want to be working at here. So be sure you read through the what is a workshop again just for some guidelines. I've added or opened up new material. There's the rules of poetry section that I want you to look at. And this kind of addresses really sort of, again, it lays out some, we don't like to think of poetry or art as having rules necessarily, but there really are some guidelines that are important to be aware of. It might make you realize certain kinds of mistakes that you have been making. And again, a mistake is all relative. Really, the rules of poetry are about making poems be as effective as they can be. So it's not like you can have there's really no such thing as a failed poem, because you can always go back to it and it could be meaningful with the right revisions. And again, we're back to that whole, what kind of writing are we doing here? We're writing as a craft for a reader, not just to get something out of our system and down on paper. So really nothing is a failure if it helps you express something that's really been bugging you, or you're happy about something and you want to express that. Those are all positive, positive things that follow from writing a poem, producing art of any kind, having a hobby, just any of that stuff. But we really are thinking more in terms of producing work that a reader that we don't know, that's just somewhere out there, all that they have is the poem in front of them. So it has to be kind of meaningful in a non-personal or impersonal way. I so often find myself sounding like T.S. Eliot about the impersonal poetry, and there should be no emotion in poetry. And I guess it's maybe not surprising, because I do agree with a lot of his sort of theories of how poetry works and how it can work best. But all of those statements, like there should be no sort of personality in the poem, something he said, or like one of the rules, there should be no emotion. Those are all conditioned and context sensitive. So you want to read all of that information, not just, no emotion. How the hell am I supposed to write a poem? It's a lot more complicated than that. But anyway, in terms of our unit here, then we have those rules that you want to look at, again, just sort of to get us thinking about writing for an audience. Obviously, read through the how a workshop, or what is a workshop, and just again to make sure that you sort of understand how to have that workshop be meaningful. So you're providing meaningful feedback to people and also getting it yourself. And hopefully everything goes smoothly, the first time around, but there may be hiccups. These things sometimes happen. Basically, and this is the only other really key component to making this go smoothly, has nothing to do with the quality of the poem that you've written or the groups or anything like that. Simply a matter of due dates. So to make the workshop work, obviously two things need to happen. You need to submit your work to the discussion board. So this should be a relatively new poem that you've written, not one that you think is perfect, because then what's the point of workshopping it? So you're not showing off the best poem you've ever written that was already published in some journal. Like, okay, but why would I give you feedback on it? Or if I did, you'd be unlikely to take it because it's already done its job as a poem. And I would limit it to maybe just one poem, maybe two if they're quite short. Feel free to ask directed questions for your readers, like, is the imagery clear? What do you think of the tone? If you don't have particular questions, your readers might hopefully zone in on particular things, not just, I like this part because it was, because I liked it. Again, it's good to hear that, but that's not all you want to hear. You want some meaningful feedback about positives and negatives with concrete examples. So be sure you're posting as a file or files that people can open. You're not pasting the text in. So just basic sort of like mechanics like that. So the first due date to have your stuff posted is Sunday, September 11th. Kind of ominous, but basically we needed to divide that workshop week into 2 due dates, so all the work gets submitted, and then of course people have a chance to go in, read, and provide feedback. So it's sort of a 2-part system here. The one fundamental difference that we have going on in terms of our workshop versus a face-to-face is that the feedback isn't immediate. Obviously, you're not sitting there in real time with people being able to get that feedback. And actually, one of the things that really ruins a workshop, to be perfectly honest, is when the poet does too much of the talking, too much of defending his princess, the poem itself, from the attack that he or she is feeling is happening. So there's too much explaining, there's too much, oh, I did it this way because. So in a 10-minute span of time, the poet has done 9 minutes of talking. Again, that's not the point of workshop. If anything, it should be the other way around. 9 minutes of everybody else and maybe a minute of the poet, if the poet at all. You may run into situations where the rule for workshop is the poet can't say anything. You're not allowed to jump to the defense of your poem because that sort of derails everything. You really have to be open to what your readers are getting. Even if you think they're getting it wrong, it's important to realize that if one person gets it wrong, okay, and your other group members sort of on a different track, but if everybody's reading an image or a line or something is confusing, it doesn't make sense to defend it because what you meant is this. You really have to take that into account as, well, maybe I need to revise that part because it's confusing. It's confused 3 or 4 readers. It's likely to confuse 30 or 40 if I were to get the poem into the hands of that many people. So the point is that the benefit kind of the the discussion board model is that once you submit your work, that your workshop group really has the opportunity to provide feedback in a reflective kind of way. They don't have to do it immediately. Things don't necessarily get sort of derailed into discussions of other things that are maybe related but not very useful. The poet, him or herself, isn't kind of hackles up and a little bit defensive, and that again becomes like a difficult situation. So there are a lot of benefits to the online version that we've got going here. But again, read through those rules, make sure you understand them in their full context, not just as these very cut and dry, simplistic terms. Read the what is a workshop so you're able to give useful feedback to people. And then, of course, be aware of the 2 due dates. The first, Sunday, September 11th, you're submitting your poem or poems to the group, to the discussion board. And then by Wednesday, September 14th, you and everyone in your group has responded to all of the other poems that have been submitted. So if I submit mine on Sunday, there's 3 other people in my group. That means that before the Wednesday due date, I have obviously, read, maybe I've printed out, and then provided feedback to each of those people on each of the poems that they submit, which is again why you don't want to submit like 8 different poems. It's just too much for people to deal with. So submit 1, maybe 2 if they're short. Keep it manageable. Okay, so hopefully that covers pretty much everything. Hopefully everything goes smoothly as far as just basic sort of technical and due date stuff. Try not to wait until late on Wednesday to be providing feedback. It's just not useful to wait that long. People are kind of like wondering, did anyone read my poem or what's going on here? So be conscientious in terms of your time management. And you don't have to read and respond all at the same time to everybody's in the group. You could literally do one day, one the next, one the next. Okay, so be in touch if you have any questions, again, about those rules, about how Workshop works. If you run into technical issues, let me know right away because I'll try to clear them up. So, like I said, our first workshop, really a fundamental part of the online writing course. We want it to go as smoothly as possible.